Lucy Newton, Little Witch, The Magic Behind the Book. Once upon a time, there was a little girl called Fiona. She grew up with books and stories and big brothers who would read her things, like the Chronicles of Narnia and The Hobbit. When she grew up, she had her own little girl, Beatty. She filled Beatty's life with magic and beautiful handmade dolls. She read her things like Bramley Hedge and The Princess and the Goblin, but Beatty needed more. So Fiona started to write stories just for her. There was The Enchanted Garden and The Adventures of Irene and Gillian, and many more. And then Beatty learnt to read. Oh, what joy! She gobbled books like Enid Blyton and The Railway Children and Nancy Drew. When Beatty got a bit bigger and became a big sister, she started to write her own stories, retellings of famous ballets like Coppelia, illustrated, of course. An essay on how to entertain a baby brother with helpful tips like, if you don't know what to do with him, then give him a bottle and put him to bed with the door closed. And best of all, the best treehouse ever. As Beatty grew up, Fiona's career started to take off as an artist. She started to make great soft sculptures and won awards for her doll making, all while going to uni and wrangling her children. She started to get books published on how to knit dolls and fairies, histories on fun things like graffiti and highwaymen, and her very first fiction book, Ghost Doll and Jasper. While Fiona was doing all of that, Beatty was growing up and starting her own life and family. She was still reading, of course, and still making up stories. Only now she typed them up on her laptop and they were a good deal longer. She started working as an editor, someone who fixes up other people's books, including for the publishing company that Fiona started with her friends Sophie and David. They'd brought out several picture books which Fiona and David had illustrated, and were now looking to move into chapter books, which are books for younger children, filled with nice, big font and black and white illustrations. And then the day came. I have a story that Christmas Press wants to publish, Fiona said. Will you edit it for me? Of course, Beatty replied. It did take Beatty a little while to get to it, but when she started reading the story of Lucy Newton, she was sorry she hadn't started immediately. Being a writer herself, she couldn't help but add a few things in here and there. Lucy Newton, Little Witch, underwent many more edits. By the third draft, the story was almost double the length of the original. What do you think of this part, Mum? I love it. Did I write it or did you? I don't know. I can't tell any more. And that's the moment they realized they had written the book together. But how would that work on the cover of a book? Written by Fiona McDonald and Beattie Alvarez, illustrated by Fiona McDonald, seemed very long to put on the cover of a book. So they had a long conversation on names. We could be Anne Constance or Fiona Alvarez. Ooh, I know, how about Phoebe? Phoebe? Yes, like Phoebe, the beginning parts of our names. And so Phoebe McArthur was born. She has curly dark red hair and is significantly taller than both of them. She lives in a run-down yet cosy cottage in the middle of nowhere, and isn't at all lonely thanks to her 4 cats, 3 chooks, 2 guinea pigs, and her extensive library. If she's not tipping cats off her lap as she writes stories, she's cooking all sorts of yummy food, such as scones with extra cream and homemade blackberry jam, or doing art at the table near the window which has the best view of her garden. Once they had settled on what Phoebe and her life was like, Beatty started to lay out the book. Many coffees were consumed as she worked to get the perfect font in the perfect size with exactly the right number of words on the page. Mum, I've sent you through a list of illustrations that we need. Fiona paled when she saw the extensive list, but being a professional, she worked through it. What kind of cat do you need? How tall is Lucy? How many slugs? If anyone saw their text messages, they would be very confused. They worked day and night, and Fiona would draw, scan, and email illustrations to Beatty, who would put them into Photoshop to make sure the blacks were black and the whites were white. She'd occasionally ask for even more illustrations, like an extra jar of coffee or some more slug slime, which of course Fiona willingly supplied. When there were no more illustrations to be done, Fiona took on the role of babysitter so that Beatty could work without interruption. Fiona read books to Beatty's two girls and told them stories of a naughty little girl who decided to go to the park on roller skates and only discovered that the hill was too steep after she'd started. Beatty worked away on InDesign and Photoshop, putting the book together, placing the slug slime perfectly, and learning how to add colour for the cover illustration, and trying to fit their name, well, Phoebe's name, perfectly in the curl of Chris's tail. It wasn't long before the book was finished. They hadn't told anyone who Phoebe McArthur was, including Beatty's daughters. Isabel enjoyed it, but she was a teenager by this stage and a bit too old for it. Charlotte, however, was 6 years old and had just learnt to read. Beatty gave her a copy of the book and waited to see what her reaction was. "Mummy, that was the best! Can I read the next one? Can I go as Lucy Newton to the book parade?" So Charlotte dressed up as Lucy Newton, and Phoebe McArthur started work on the next story, which featured in A Christmas Cornucopia, the 2019 Christmas anthology by Christmas Press. She is currently working on the next full-length Lucy Newton book, which will hopefully be out in 2021.